Well, good morning. Welcome to Grover Hill Zion United Methodist Church here at 204 South Harrison Street in Grover Hill. Again, we're glad you're viewing. And of course, you're always welcome to come and be with us at 10:30 on Sunday mornings or any other time we have activities going on here in the church. This morning is the fourth Sunday after Epiphany, after the coming of the wise men to Jesus. So we're talking this morning from the Sermon on the Mount. It's Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 through 12, where he's teaching his disciples, blessed are. Now, we don't always realize the blessings that God has given to us, do we? Sometimes we don't see them right away. Sometimes we see them long afterwards. Sometimes we just miss them. We may feel starved and discouraged, but God's blessings are right there for us. All we have to do is to just receive them. We have to look and be aware of them and then just receive them. Some time ago, a friend of mine invited me to a Chamber of Commerce banquet. I had never been to one of those before, so I really didn't know what to expect. I must say, though, that I was pleasantly surprised after the supper was over with. There were over 250 people there at that dinner, just filled the room to capacity. And after dinner, a speaker came along and talked, of course, about business. And he talked for a while, and then they handed out some awards to chamber members for various things that they had done throughout the year. And I knew a number of those folks. Went to school with some of them, worked with some of them years before, so I knew, not all of them by any means, but I knew some of them. It was kind of nice to see all of that take place. And after the awards were handed out, each recipient then said a little something about the award and how meaningful it was. And I began to notice that I never once, and it's kind of unusual, I thought, I never once heard anyone talk about the adversities that they had to overcome or the ups and downs that they encountered as they built their business to wherever it was. No one blamed anyone for the hardships that they had to endure along the way. They didn't point fingers at someone else or some events that hurt them. They didn't display any pity party. They just accepted God's blessings and acknowledged that God was with them as they journeyed through life and persevered and overcame. Just like us, some of them I knew had gone through some very serious health issues. Some of them had overcome some financial difficulties. Some of them were torn apart because of broken relationships. And yet each person was very, very respectful of all of the others. The award winners, as well as those who were nominated, not only were running businesses, but they were giving back to the community in many ways. They were giving back a lot, and in a lot of ways that others knew nothing about or very little about. They didn't brag about it, they just did it. They didn't talk about themselves, they only talked about what they could do for the community and what they could give to the community. It was as though they were obsessed with caring for and giving others a chance. God works through people like that. By giving away to help others, they were blessed. Blessed not as the world blesses, but as God gives. When God blesses you, He intends for you to be a blessing to others. In the end, it doesn't matter what you do in the world. It matters only what you've done for Christ. That's what really matters. On the way home, I told my pastor friend that invited me, I couldn't believe how positive everyone was. Nobody whining or complaining about anything. I never heard one negative comment from anyone. No one found fault with anyone else or anything else. Instead, they knew there were some problems that they hoped they could resolve. They looked for solutions to difficult problems, and they did it together. Have you ever noticed that when you go through troubles of life, that it seems to make a person better? And when you give to others, your whole attitude is different from those who do not give or return much at all. The folks I witnessed were an example of those types of Christians that Jesus describes in the Beatitudes in the Sermon on the Mount. Chapter 5 of Matthew begins what is known as the Sermon on the Mount. Now, the Sermon on the Mount is not just one sermon, but several, over a couple chapters. And it was delivered over several days of Jesus' teaching. In the preceding chapter, Jesus began calling his followers so that they could be with him as he began his ministry. Now, as the crowds gathered, Jesus took his new followers up on a hillside, and they sat down and he began teaching them about his ministry. And that day, teachers sat down to teach when they poured out their heart. And Jesus is about to pouring out his heart as he's revealing all about his ways to them. He begins teaching by saying, blessed are. I think there's 10 of them, 9 or 10 of them, blessed are. Of course, there's many more throughout the scriptures. In English, we understand blessed as being happy. However, Jesus spoke in Aramaic, and the word he used meant something just a little bit different than happiness. The real meaning of blessed in this context is, oh, the blessed, or oh, the joy of the poor in spirit. Now, he doesn't mean the impoverished or those without material wealth or those living in squalor. Jesus would not stand for that. He is speaking of the person who realizes their own helplessness, and he puts their trust in God completely. Now, that sounds kind of crazy, doesn't it? But who thinks like that? We think that those with the most are the ones that are blessed the most. But Jesus' teaching is completely different than that. It's completely counter to the ways of the world. And so the world just can't understand what he's saying. When he says blessed are, it's like saying, oh, the joy of being a Christian and following Christ. The blessedness of Christ cannot be earned. It is a free gift of God. It simply needs to be recognized and received. And since it is a gift from God and it can't be earned, it can't be taken away either. The government or the world didn't give it to you, and the government or the world can't take it from you. Something that God has planted inside of you. In his book called The Applause of Heaven, Max Lucado describes the Beatitudes like I've never seen them described before. He writes that the Beatitudes are not a list of proverbs or a compilation of independent sayings, but rather a step-by-step description of how God rebuilds the believer's heart. Jesus promises blessing to all who come after him. To all who decide to live their lives each day by his example. Following Jesus, you become free of the world. At the food pantry over the years, I've encountered many people down there, and each person has a story. And I see in many of those this quiet blessedness that Jesus is teaching about. That is to say, they have this spirit or attitude about which the Beatitudes are teaching. Surely some of these folks are examples of who Jesus is teaching about who is blessed. Some time ago, I asked a woman, an older woman, how she was doing. And she said, things have been tough. I'm running out of fuel for heat now. But we're getting by, and God will continue to provide for us. I asked a man how things were for him, and he said, I felt a sense of humility in his answer. He had been laid off at that time for over a year, and still he was at peace. He was at peace, inner peace, that only God can give. He said, God provides, and I just take one day at a time. Another person said, I have everything I need for happiness. Everything I need for happiness. I encounter people who say that all the time. Sometimes it's hard for us to believe it, but it's true. They have that happiness, that blessedness deep inside. Over the years, I've spent some time with the dying. Some of those folks that have went so far to plan their service. Some of those folks are at a relatively young age. As they share the stories of their life together with their family and the things that brought them happiness in life, I usually don't say much. I just listen. You sit there and you realize it's just hard to be bold in the presence of the sacred. Those are sacred moments. Those are the kinds of attitudes the Beatitudes convey. The attitude that I just can't make it by myself. I'm totally dependent upon God. I trust God with all my being. For example, John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist Church, his last words are recorded as being, the best of all, God is with us. The best of all, God is with us. Wesley and many like him believe that. The best of all, God is with us, even in the midst of leaving this world. Scholars say blessed are, and by the way, blessed are, there's a song that Wayne Watson sang many years ago. It's still on YouTube. You can look it up on there. It's called Blessed Are. Beautiful song. And it sings the Beatitudes. Anyway, scholars say blessed are. Those words are really not translatable into Greek, for which much of the New Testament is translated in. So instead of saying blessed are, the text is really saying, oh, the bliss of the person. So blessed are the poor. Really reads, oh, the bliss of the person who has realized his own utter helplessness and who has put his whole trust in God, for thus alone he can render to God that perfect obedience which will make him a citizen of the kingdom of heaven. I'll share just a couple more of these with you, and then I'll close. But another one, he says, blessed are those who mourn. Really equals, oh, the bliss of the person whose heart is broken for the world's suffering and for his own sin, for out of his sorrow he will find the joy of God. Blessed are the merciful. Justice and mercy, you realize, go hand in hand. Equals the bliss of the person who gets right inside other people until he can see with their eyes, think with their thoughts, feel with their feelings. For who does that will find others do the same for him and will know that that is what God in Jesus Christ has done. And lastly, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Really is translated, blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you falsely and say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets and those who were before you. The Beatitudes speak of that joy which seeks us through our pain and sorrows, loss and grief, and are powerless to touch. That joy which shines through tears and which nothing in life or death can take away. Jesus clearly tells us it's not going to be easy to follow him. He said they persecuted him and they'll do the same to you. But for those who do follow him, they will indeed know true happiness and they will see God. This blessedness that Jesus speaks of is not for some distant time in the future. It is for the here and now. It's for the here and now if you will only believe and trust in him. Amen. Have a great and blessed week.